G'day, my name's Gavin, and I've chosen to do the grammar of war discourse as my concept, and this is my main media element, which is a photo by Adam Ferguson. It's a photo essay by Adam Ferguson. Basically, what I've chosen to discuss is how embedded journalism and the concepts surrounding that affect the information we receive as a public. So, Adam Ferguson is an Australian photojournalist who contributes to the Times. But what's interesting about him is although he's a freelance journalist, he chooses to embed himself a lot of the time within a local military unit, either being Australian, British, or American. And so, what he takes photos of mainly though is just low-level infantrymen and their day-to-day life. So as you can see, he really focuses on what the infantrymen do and the role they play. But he doesn't just go around with them, he lives with them, he eats with them, he learns about them. And with his photos, he tries to emphasise the colours and aspects of war that we don't see, using filters, and he does a lot of portraits as well. The grammar of war discourse is pretty summable up in one quote, as the history is written by the victors, Winston Churchill, which basically means that the version of information that we get during war is heavily influenced by the journalists who write it and the way they receive their information. So what the government wants to do during war reporting, it really wants to nullify rather than conceal undesirable news. So don't try and hold them back, disprove them. Control the emphasis rather than facts. He wants to balance bad news with good and lie directly only when certain the lie will not be found out. So during wartime, make sure that everything that we get told will only be disproved after the war. And the tools they use to accomplish this are distraction, complacency, support, and making it relatable. So they want to distract the general public from what is going on by, example of that is the look for weapons of mass destruction. Complacency, make us complacent about the war by describing to us that it's happening at its pace and everything's going according to plan. Make us support the war by using things such as Adam Ferguson's photo essays, which really make us relate to the local troops and support their cause and support them, rather than look at the war as a whole and critically and analyse whether or not it's actually what we should be doing. But what happens to journalism during this process is that the very nature of embedded coverage produces decontextualised information. So as the troop lives with them and as the journalist lives with the troops, he starts to become inevitably biased towards their point and start to tell their stories and their point of view rather than the event as a whole and the event as a military incursion, not the fight and plight of one group of soldiers. And this sort of leads away from the paradigms of what journalism stands for, rather than, the paradigms of media ethicists from the second half of the previous century seem to have been forgotten. So we've seen a trend now where journalism has sort of shifted more towards selling value than necessity. And this is a link about two journalists discussing embedded journalism in American war, from the American side of the latest war. Here it is. This is a big drive.
The fact is, war coverage, combat reporting is very difficult to do. You're on one side, and you obviously have some patriotic sensitivities on the part of readers, viewers, and listeners, and editors, and political leaders who don't want you to stray too far from that. So, in a case like that, it's hard to provide balanced news, hard to provide news about the other side.
Most of the recent war reporting that we see has been done by reporters, journalists who are embedded with military units. Do you think that compromises the objectivity, the way that the story is presented to the public?
Well, it can give you a good picture of what's happening to troops on the front lines, and that's an important story. But it's not the whole story of the war. The whole story of wars has to do with the larger strategic issues and how planning is executed and how well it's realized. And I think it's worth saying that although we talk about embedded as if it were a new idea, embedding goes way back. Pretty much all wars have had embedded journalism. And in World War I, in fact, there was a strong impetus on the part of military leaders to get people like Ernie Pyle and many other reporters on the front line, where they would report good hometown stories about GIs and not necessarily be looking at the larger strategic.
Right. Do you think that it's some?
So that's describing how these tools are emphasised by the use of journalism and local hometown stories. They can distract the population from what's going on, and really makes the populace support these local young soldiers who are just doing their job and trying to stay alive. So as you said there, like governments have been using this style for a long time, and a lot of my research has enlightened me to the fact that as long as there have been newspapers, there's been a lot of war spin by governments. And this is an example of it happening in China. So it's definitely not just a Eastern idea, a Western idea. It's been used by all forms of government for a long time. Once the countries were, and this is a quote from this article, once the countries were at war, the reporting was skewed to emphasise one particular narrative of freeing Iraqis from despotic dictatorship of Saddam Hussein and to de-emphasise or outright ignore other stories. So that's to do with the Iraqi war and how America made it all about trying to get Saddam Hussein and to free the populace from his evidently despotic dictatorship. However, the real reasons that that war was created are still speculated on, and this technique and these tools are how the government convinces the populace to go. And embedded journalism is just another tool that can be used to convince the public. And Adam Ferguson's photos, although they depict young soldiers doing their job, they still distract from the overall questions we should be asking, such as, why are we here and why should these people be here? And this is a big draft, but I do have a lot of information. I'm just sort of organising how I'm going to present it. But basically, the major points are, the major is discussing these four tools and how they use them to achieve their goals, and what we as an audience need to do to overcome this, and whether or not embedded journalism is something that should be still used, or if it's something that should be looked upon as a bit of shallow journalism in its own sense. So that is my draft. So thank you.